I packed his favorite chin-chin in a small Ziploc bag, the kind from that shop on Wusei Market Road he always asks me to bring whenever I visit him on trips. I ironed the dress he once said made me look like the woman he fell in love with. I wore the perfume he bought me for our last anniversary, the one that makes him close his eyes and say, "That's you." I was going to surprise my husband, that was all. Nothing complicated, nothing dramatic. Just a wife who missed her man and decided for once to do something spontaneous about it. I almost didn't go. Twice I talked myself out of it. The first time I told myself he was busy, that showing up unannounced might stress him, might feel like I was checking on him. The second time, I had already started unpacking the overnight bag when something I still cannot name made me stop, zip it back up, and book the flight anyway. Something told me to go. I have thought about that feeling many times since, whether it was instinct or God or simply a woman's body knowing something her mind had not yet accepted. I went. The flight to Abuja was less than an hour. I spent most of it looking out the window, smiling to myself, rehearsing the face I was going to make when Larry opened the door and saw me standing there. That surprised, delighted, "What are you doing here?" face I had been imagining since I booked the ticket. I had flowers, white and yellow, his favorites. I had a dinner reservation at a restaurant near the hotel with good reviews and a view of the city lights. I had planned nothing beyond that, just presence, just the simple gift of showing up. I had no idea I was walking toward the last moment of the life I thought I had. The Transcorp Hilton lobby is the kind of beautiful that makes you feel like life is fine. Cool air wraps around you the moment the glass doors slide open. Marble floors catch the overhead light and throw it back in long, clean lines. The click of heels echoes softly beneath the hum of air conditioning. Business people move through the space with quiet confidence, rolling carry-ons, pressed shirts, phones to ears. The smell of eucalyptus and leather and something expensive that belongs to spaces where people pay to feel untouchable, unobserved, consequence-free. I crossed the lobby with flowers in my hand and a smile I hadn't had to manufacture. I took the elevator up. The doors closed, and I saw myself in the mirrored panel, dressed carefully, holding yellow flowers, looking like a woman on her way to something good. I had no idea this was the last moment I would feel that way for a very long time. I found the corridor, thick carpet the color of dark sand, quiet under my feet. Abstract paintings on the walls in muted golds and browns. The hallway smelled of cleaning product and that same expensive floral scent from the elevator, the scent of a space where people pay to feel untouchable, unobserved, consequence-free. I found the room number. I stopped in front of the door. I shifted the flowers to my left hand. I raised my right hand to knock, and then I heard it. Laughter. A woman's laughter, easy, unguarded, fully at home, the kind that only comes out when you are completely safe, completely comfortable, completely unbothered by the world outside the room you are in. My hand stopped in the air, because I knew that laugh. I had heard it at Christmas tables and birthday parties and in the back seat of our father's old Peugeot when we were children. I had heard it at my own wedding from the front row before the music even started. I had heard it at 2 a.m. on phone calls that went too long and neither of us wanted to end. I would know that laugh in a crowded stadium. It was Renee, my sister, Renee.
The flowers fell out of my hand. I don't remember deciding to let them go. One moment I was holding them, and the next they were on the carpet, white and yellow petals against dark sand-colored carpet, and I was looking down at them as if they belonged to someone else entirely. The sounds coming through that door were not the sounds of a business meeting. I will not describe them. I don't need to. You already understand. I stood there for what felt like 10 seconds and 10 years simultaneously. Some stubborn, desperate part of my brain was still constructing innocent explanations. The television, the wrong room, a coincidence. But a deeper part of me, the part that does not lie, had already received the truth completely and was already rearranging everything around it. I bent down, I picked up the flowers, I walked back toward the elevator the way you walk when your legs are moving, but you are not fully inside your body. I did not go back to his floor. I went to the front desk, I booked my own room, I rode a different elevator to a different floor, let myself into a room I had not planned to need, set the flowers on the desk, and sat on the edge of the bed. The room was cool and neutral and impersonal. White sheets, a window with a view of Abuja beginning to light up in the early evening. Somewhere in this same building, in a room above me, my husband and my sister were together. I sat with that until it stopped being abstract and became fully, completely real. Then I did something I will never fully be able to explain. I went to the bathroom, turned on the shower so the sound would cover it, sat down on the cold tiled floor, and I cried. Just once, just there, quietly, so no one would hear. Then I stood up, washed my face, walked back to the bed, and picked up my phone. I typed, "Thinking of you. Hope the trip is going well." I stared at it for a moment. Then I sent it. 3 minutes later, Larry replied, "All good. Miss you. Exhausting day." I read it twice. He had typed those words from the same building, possibly from that same room. He typed "miss you" and "exhausting day" with my sister beside him and sent it without a tremor, without hesitation, without the weight of a single word. That was when I understood the full depth of what I was dealing with. Not a moment of weakness, not a drunken mistake. This was practiced. This was fluent. This was a man who had been living 2 lives so comfortably that the switch between them cost him nothing at all. I set the phone face down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. I didn't cry again that night. I just started thinking, really thinking, for the first time in a very long time.
I flew home the next morning before Larry was due back. I sat in the window seat and watched Abuja shrink beneath the clouds, and I thought about the kind of wife I had been. The kind who knocked before entering his office. The kind who never picked up his phone when it buzzed on the counter. The kind who believed that trust was something you demonstrated through restraint, through not looking, not questioning, not needing to know. I had been so proud of that, of how secure I was, how I never made him feel monitored or suspected. 30,000 feet in the air, I began to understand that my security had not been strength. It had been a door I had left wide open, and they had been walking through it for over a year. I walked through the front door of our home and stood in the hallway. Same house, same furniture, same smell of the candle I kept on the console table by the entrance, same framed photos on the wall, our wedding day, a trip to Dubai 2 years ago, a Christmas photo with Renee standing between us, her arm around my shoulder, smiling at the camera with no visible weight on her conscience whatsoever. I took that photo off the wall. I laid it face down on the table. Then I began to walk through the house the way a doctor examines something they are no longer hoping is fine. Room by room, slowly. The kitchen. Nothing immediately unusual, but I noticed now, with new eyes, how often Renee had stood in this kitchen, how many times she had leaned against that counter with a cup of tea, laughing at something Larry said, staying past the point where a visit naturally ends. I had always read that as love for family. I was reading it differently now. The bedroom. I opened his bedside drawer, something I had never done without permission in 4 years of marriage. A phone charger, paracetamol, a folded receipt from a Lagos hotel dated 8 months ago on a weekend I now recalled clearly. He had told me he was visiting a university friend. I had packed him a snack for the drive. I photographed the receipt and put it back exactly as I found it. Then I went to his office. I stood at the office door for a long moment. 4 years of marriage, and I had never opened his desk drawers without asking. I had always told myself that was love, giving space, demonstrating trust, being the kind of wife who didn't need to check. Standing in that doorway, I was beginning to understand that it had simply been blindness dressed in good manners. I opened the first drawer. Bank statements for an account I had never seen. Hotel receipts from Port Harcourt, Lagos, Abuja. Dates I cross-referenced immediately against trips he had described to me in specific, convincing detail. A restaurant receipt from Abuja dated on a Friday evening 3 months ago. That Friday I remembered clearly because I had called him at 9 p.m. and he had answered, voice tired and easy, and said he was still in a meeting. The receipt was time-stamped 8:47 p.m. Dinner for two bottles of wine, a total that no business meeting requires. My hands were steady. Something in me had gone very quiet and very focused, the way everything goes still just before something breaks completely open. Then I saw the tablet. It was on the shelf behind his desk, one of those older models that sits in a space so long it becomes invisible, the kind of thing your eyes skip over because it has always been there. I almost walked past it. I didn't. I picked it up, pressed the power button. It still had charge. Larry had never deleted anything. Renee's name loaded at the top of the screen. Her profile photo, the same one she used everywhere, the same face I had known my entire life, above a conversation that went further than I had prepared myself for. I sat down in his chair. I began to read. I read the way you read something you cannot stop, even though each line costs you something real. Their words, back and forth, casual and intimate, and completely without shame. Messages sent on evenings I could place, evenings I had been in the next room, or in our bed, or standing in this very house making dinner. Messages referencing places they had been together, things said to each other, plans being made. Plans. They were making plans. I photographed every single page with steady hands, something cold and clarifying spreading through my chest with each click of the camera. Then I closed the tablet and placed it back on the shelf at the exact angle I had found it, in the center of its own dust outline. I walked out of the office, closed the door behind me, sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the cupboard. I did not call anyone. I did not reach for the phone, because what I had just found was not something you spend in a panic. What I had just found was power, and I already understood from the past 24 hours what it cost to move before you were ready. I was not going to make that mistake. I gave myself one full day to feel it. Just one. I sat with the grief, the nausea, that particular hollowness that comes not from the discovery itself, but from understanding how long it existed before you found it. I let all of it move through me, the betrayal, the images I could not unsee, the questions that had no clean answers. Then, on the second morning, I woke before sunrise, made tea, and sat at the kitchen table with everything I had gathered laid out in front of me. I needed the full picture, not pieces, everything. 18 months of credit card statements, laid out in order. What had looked like ordinary spending now read like a confession. Restaurants and neighborhoods neither of us had reason to frequent. Weekend hotel charges on dates with explanations I now recognized as rehearsed. A florist charge I had never received flowers from. Each one small enough to dismiss in isolation. Together, they formed a pattern so clear and so deliberate that I felt something shift inside me, past grief, past betrayal, into something colder and more useful. Then I opened my personal diary, a habit from my mother, just dates, events, small observations. I went back 16 months and mapped Renee's visits against weekends Larry was home. The correlation was exact. Every time he was home on a weekend, she had found a reason to appear. She needed advice, she was passing through, she just wanted to see me.
I closed the diary and sat with the precision of it. This had not been careless. This had been managed. I checked the shared cloud account, one Larry and I had set up early in the marriage and stopped thinking about, the way you stop thinking about anything that becomes background. He had deleted files, but deleted on a poorly managed shared account does not always mean gone. 14 months of photographs loaded slowly. Renee in a restaurant I had never been taken to, Renee in the passenger seat of Larry's car on a road I recognized, one photograph I will not describe, taken somewhere private that removed the last possible thread of doubt. 14 months. I sat with that number until it became fully real in my body, not just my mind.
And then I thought about my birthday dinner, 4 months ago. Renee had suggested the restaurant. She had arrived before any other guest to make sure the table was decorated. She had sat directly across from me all evening, refilling my glass, leaning forward when I spoke, making me feel seen and celebrated and completely loved. At the end of the night, she had stood, raised her glass, and looked me directly in the eyes. "You deserve every good thing, Wendy. I mean that." The table had cheered. Larry had squeezed my hand. I closed my eyes and sat with the specific architecture of that cruelty, the planning it required, the steadiness. 4 months into a 14-month betrayal, and she had stood at my birthday table and delivered that toast without flinching once. That was not weakness. That was not confusion or guilt or a woman caught between two things she loved. That was a choice, looked at directly, made deliberately, and made anyway. You know, before we continue, if you've ever trusted someone completely and been made to feel foolish for it, pause for just a second and hit the like button. Stories like this find the women who need them because you push them forward. Subscribe if you haven't. Now let's keep going. I called Ada that evening. Ada and I had been friends since university. No shared social circles with my family, no connection to Larry, no reason to speak to anyone in my life. She received difficult information and became immediately useful rather than immediately dramatic. I needed that more than comfort. I told her everything, from the flight to the tablet to the birthday dinner. My voice was steady throughout. When I finished, Ada was quiet for a moment, then, "I know someone you need to speak to, a lawyer. She is sharp, she is discreet, and she does not lose." I wrote down the name, made the appointment for the following week. When I put the phone down, I looked out at the compound, the garden, the car in the driveway, the life with his fingerprints all over it, and something settled in me into a place past hurt, past anger, past anything with an easy name. This was not a mistake. A mistake is something that happens once and is regretted. This was a decision, made over and over every single day for more than a year. Now, I was going to make some decisions of my own.
Mrs. Okafor's office was on the 3rd floor of a building in Maitama that smelled of serious work and old books. She was in her mid-50s, small in frame but large in presence, with reading glasses she used as a thinking prop, picking them up, setting them down, turning them slowly when processing something. She reviewed everything I had brought without reacting, simply read, made notes on a yellow legal pad, turned pages, made more notes. When she finished, she set her glasses down and looked at me directly. "This is solid. The financial trail alone tells a strong story. The identity of the affair partner, your own sister, that changes the weight of this considerably. Not just in court, in every room this will ever be discussed in." She paused. "But you must not move yet. Not a word, not a changed tone, not a single cold look across the dinner table. You go home and you are exactly the woman he believes you to be, because a man who believes he is safe does not prepare, and you need him completely unprepared when this lands." Then she leaned slightly forward. "There is one more thing. I need you to check your joint accounts this week. All of them. I want current balances." I asked her why. She looked at me steadily. "Because in my experience, when a man is planning to leave a marriage, he often begins moving money before his wife realizes the marriage is ending. I want to know if we are already behind." I drove home with that sitting in my chest like a stone. I walked through the front door and I became a performance. Larry came home that evening to a wife who had made pepper soup from scratch because he had mentioned that morning he was feeling tired. I set the table, I asked about his day, I laughed in the right places, I refilled his glass without being asked. He ate 2 bowls and told me I was the best thing that had ever happened to me. I smiled and said he was too kind. Later that evening, Renee sent me a voice note, something about a television show, laughing at the end the way she always did. I listened to it once, then I typed back a reply with laughing emojis and a question about the show, the exact texture of a normal sisterly exchange. When I put the phone down, I sat quietly with what I had just done. How easy it was, how completely natural it felt to perform warmth I no longer possessed. And I understood, for the first time, how they had done it for 14 months. The next morning, I checked the accounts. Then I called Mrs. Okafor. She answered on the second ring. I read her the figures. There was a pause on her end that lasted just long enough to tell me everything before she spoke. Wendy, the investment account, the one in both your names, has been reduced by 60% in the last 6 weeks. Withdrawals made in increments small enough to not trigger automatic alerts. The room went very still. I said, "He has been moving money?" "Yes," she said, "and he has a head start."
Mrs. Okafor moved quickly. She filed an emergency application to freeze the remaining joint assets before anything further could be touched. The application required evidence of deliberate financial manipulation, the withdrawal pattern, the timing, the undisclosed account statement I had photographed in his office drawer. We had all of it. The freeze was granted within 48 hours. When Larry checked the account 2 days later and found he could not access it, he said nothing to me. He came home that evening, sat at the dinner table, and performed normally. I watched him from across the table and understood that we were now 2 people playing opposite sides of the same stage, both aware the curtain was about to fall, neither willing to move first. He smiled at me over his plate. I smiled back. It was the longest dinner of my life. Meanwhile, I was building the second half of the plan. I moved my personal savings, money from before the marriage, money earned independently, to an account with no connection to Larry. I documented every financial contribution I had made to our household since the wedding: rent during the early years when his income was unstable, the sitting room furniture, the kitchen renovation 18 months ago, completed, I noted with cold precision, right around the time the affair had begun. I had funded the renovation of a home in which my sister was quietly becoming comfortable. When I brought the full financial file to Mrs. Okafor, she was quiet for a moment. Then, "This changes your position significantly. This is exceptional work." I had one decision remaining: how the confrontation would land. I decided they would not be confronted separately. Larry could not be allowed to call Renee before she arrived at the house. Renee could not be allowed to call Larry before the papers reached his office. They had spent 14 months coordinating against me in silence. They would receive no coordination on the morning it ended. I chose the day. I wrote it on a small piece of paper, folded it, and placed it in the inside pocket of my bag, close, like a decision you want to keep near you. Then I went to bed beside my husband, lay in the dark, and listened to him breathe. He slept the way people sleep when they believe they are completely safe, deeply, evenly, without interruption. I lay beside him and thought about something Mrs. Okafor had said: "A man who believes he is safe does not prepare." They had been planning against me for over a year. Now I was planning, and unlike them, I was not going to make a single mistake. The day arrived like any other Tuesday. I woke before my alarm, lay still in the gray early light, and ran through every detail one final time. Found nothing missing. Got up, made tea, sat by the window, and prayed. Not for revenge, I want to be clear about that. I prayed for steadiness, for the kind of quiet that does not shake when pressure is applied directly to it. By 8:30, I was ready. I texted Larry as he dressed for work. "Have a good day. Drive safe." He replied with a heart emoji and left. I watched his car pull out of the compound. Then I went to the kitchen table and began to arrange what I had spent weeks collecting. I had been up since 5, laying it out. Every hotel receipt, arranged chronologically. Every photographed page of the text thread, printed and dated. The credit card statements with relevant charges circled in red. The recovered cloud photographs, printed and labeled. The financial withdrawal records. The undisclosed account statement. 14 months of a secret life laid out on a kitchen table in neat, quiet, devastating rows. I stepped back and looked at it. Then I picked up my phone and called Renee. My voice was warm, easy, completely normal, the voice of a sister who needed a small favor on an ordinary morning. "Can you come by? I need help with something in the house." She said, "Of course." She said she would be there in an hour. She arrived in 45 minutes, early, the way you arrive when you have nothing to hide. At exactly 9 a.m., the process server walked into the reception of Larry's office building with a sealed envelope. His assistant signed for it. Larry was in a meeting room with 2 colleagues when he opened it. The divorce petition, the evidence addendum, the asset freeze notification, the financial disclosure request, every document Mrs. Okafor had prepared, in his hands, in front of witnesses, with nowhere to compose his face. Mrs. Okafor had arranged for confirmation of delivery. My phone buzzed with her message at 9:06 a.m. Delivered. Signed for. He has it. 11 minutes later, my doorbell rang.
I opened the door. I smiled. I stepped aside and let Renee in. She walked into the sitting room and turned toward me with an easy, familiar expression, about to ask what I needed help with. The casual comfort of someone who has been in this house so many times she no longer thinks about entering it. Then she saw the kitchen table. I watched her face move through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion first, then a brief, desperate flicker of hope that there was another explanation, then recognition, then a fear so complete it seemed to hollow her from the inside out. She saw her own messages printed on paper. She saw the hotel receipts. She saw the photographs she believed had been deleted. She saw 14 months of a secret life laid out with the quiet, merciless precision of someone who had taken their time. She looked at me. I said nothing. I let the table speak. When I finally spoke, my voice did not waver once. I want you to leave my house. I am not saying this in anger. I am saying it because it is the truth, and I am done arranging my life around things that are not true. She cried. She started sentences she could not finish. She reached for my arm, and I stepped back, not violently, just with a distance that communicated everything words could not. She tried once more. "Wendy, please, just let me explain." I walked to the front door and held it open. She left. I stood in the doorway and watched her car until it turned the corner and disappeared completely. Then I went inside, sat at the kitchen table surrounded by 14 months of evidence, and called my mother. I had already sent everything to my mother's email before Renee's car reached the junction. I told her the full story, in order, without hysteria, without exaggeration, without the kind of emotional flooding that makes people want to mediate rather than believe. I presented it as fact, supported by evidence, stated plainly, the way Mrs. Okafor had taught me to present anything that needed to be received clearly and completely. My mother was silent for a long time when I finished. Then, "Send me everything again. I want to read every single page myself." By the time Larry began calling, his name lighting up my screen over and over, back to back, the frantic pattern of a man whose plan has just collapsed publicly, my mother had already spoken to my father. By the time Renee tried to reach her, the line was busy. By the time they both started calling, there was nothing left to say. The truth had already arrived before them. Larry tried to manage the narrative. He called family members with a version of events that used words like complicated and struggling for a while and there are things you don't know. He was composed and articulate and approximately 4 days too late. The divorce did not proceed without difficulty. I will not pretend otherwise. There were tense weeks, a disputed account, a valuation argument over the house that felt designed to exhaust rather than resolve. One evening, Mrs. Okafor called and said quietly, "Wendy, this next part could go either way. I need you to stay calm and trust what we have built." I sat with that through a long, sleepless night. I stayed calm. I trusted the process. We prevailed. I kept the home. The settlement was fair. I signed nothing that required my silence. Renee did not disappear from the family entirely. She was still a daughter, still present at gatherings where absence would have needed explanation. But something had shifted in the air around her that no one needed to announce. Conversations paused slightly when she entered rooms. Hugs lasted a second shorter than they used to. My mother loved her because a mother does not stop, but the ease between them was gone, and everyone felt its absence the way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue, constantly, without meaning to. Some losses do not need to be declared, they simply become true. Months passed. I repainted the bedroom a shade of deep green I had always loved and Larry had always dismissed without discussion. I bought curtains I chose entirely alone, without consulting anyone, without wondering if someone else would approve. I started taking long walks in the evenings as the sun went low, something I had told myself for years I didn't have time for. I was learning, slowly, that I had made time for everything and everyone except the quietest, most essential version of myself. I began remembering small things I had set aside, a book series I had abandoned midway through, a recipe I used to make on Sunday mornings just because I liked the smell of it filling the house, the specific, underrated pleasure of a morning with nowhere to be and no role to perform for anyone. I will not tell you I healed quickly. There were long nights. There were ordinary Tuesday afternoons when grief arrived without warning and had to simply be sat with until it passed. Healing is not a single morning. It is a long series of small, unglamorous choices to keep going, and then one day you look up and realize the choosing has become easier without you noticing when. One afternoon, several months after the divorce was finalized, I nearly walked into a woman outside a pharmacy, an acquaintance I hadn't seen since before everything fell apart. We had never been particularly close, but I stopped when I saw her face because I recognized what was sitting on it. Not from a mirror exactly, but from memory. That particular exhaustion, that specific quality of a smile working too hard to hold its own shape. I asked if she was all right. She paused the way you pause when someone asks the question you have been hoping and dreading someone would ask. Then quietly, looking down at the ground, she said she was going through something at home. Her husband, someone she suspected was close to them. She didn't know what to do. She didn't even know, she said, if she was imagining it. I gently took her arm and suggested we find somewhere to sit. We sat for over an hour. I told her what I knew, not to frighten her, but to prepare her, to give her the one thing no one had thought to give me, a steady voice that said, "You are not imagining it, you are not crazy, and you are going to be all right." When we parted, she held my hand for a moment and said thank you in a way that carried far more weight than the words themselves. I drove home as the evening came in, sat in my repainted bedroom in my new curtain light, and understood something quietly and completely. I could not save my marriage. I could not save my relationship with my sister. Those things were taken from me by choices I did not make. But I saved myself, and I did it quietly, carefully, and without becoming someone I didn't recognize. The axe forgets, but the tree remembers.
and the tree is still standing. They planned in secret for 14 months. I ended it in daylight. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. New stories are here every week, and every single one is made for you.